They Might Be Giants, geek rock's golden boys, the nasal maestros of New York, a peculiar, prolific indie band that gave accordion, clarinet, cheapo drum machines, and obscure abstract lyricism safe homes in rock music, all centered around a pair of childhood friends named John. They Might Be Giants are my favorite band. You can just tell, right? I grew up with They Might Be Giants, and like the grand majority of music I love, I rediscovered them in high school. They had done those collaborations with Homestar Runner, and I recognized them as that band from my childhood, so I dove deep into their discography, and they established themselves as my number one from there. And compared to some of my other very favorite artists, Elvis Costello, Sparks, David Bowie, Scott Walker, The Clash, all legends in their own right who have some crap to their names, They Might Be Giants have a remarkably consistent discography. There's very little of their output I don't like, and they have a lot of output. This band has a mountain of material floating around in the ether, from the original run of their famous Dial-A-Song service, to its revivals in 2015 and 2018, to commercials and commissions they've done, to obscurities they only released on their old podcast or under TMBG Unlimited. The quality and quantity of their music is something to celebrate, but for the purposes of this video, we're sticking only to their full-length studio albums. Thus, some caveats. I will not be ranking their EPs. With how short they are, it's not really fair to compare them to the LPs. Plus, it's sometimes fuzzy what's considered an EP and what's considered a single, so I'm just gonna leave that. I'm also not ranking compilations or live albums, because those are primarily made of material that was released in other forms. I'm making one exception that kinda counts as both, though: venue songs, because the grand majority of those tracks were never released under anything except the Venue Songs project. Though we will see that what the band counts as an album and as a compilation can also be arbitrary sometimes. I'm also not including the members' solo projects like Monopuff, John Linnell's solo, or Danny's Kids albums, because again, it's not fair to compare them to the band's albums. State Songs is the best, though. All that said, I'm still left with 24 albums released over the course of 35 years, and that's just what's been released as of this video. Who knows how much more they got left in them. At the time of filming, John Flansburgh is recovering from injuries sustained in a car crash. So John, if you somehow see this, I hope you heal up quick, and please don't watch this video, it'll probably make you mad. So join me as I dive into every studio album by They Might Be Giants, review them on their merits and weaknesses, no numerical scores, and rank them from worst to best. Before we begin, I want to shout out Elliot Roberts.
Hello, everyone.
This was inspired by his video where he reviewed and ranked all of Paul McCartney's solo albums. Be sure to check that one out too. It's a great watch, regardless of how you feel about McCartney or the Beatles. Since I wrote the script, he also ranked all of John Lennon's solo albums. I recommend Elliot's whole channel if you're a fan of 60s and 70s music. And best hair in the biz. But if I hadn't accidentally cut my bangs too short, I'd be coming for your crown, Roberts. Let's get to ranking these albums, starting with the only three the band ever put out that I don't like very much. Number 24, Here Comes Science. No, their kids' albums are not inherently going to be low on this list. If any band is actually well-equipped to make kids' music that even adults can enjoy, it's They Might Be Giants, in part because kids already like their music. This album is at the bottom because it's just not a very good They Might Be Giants or edutainment album. This is actually the band's fourth kids' album, and the last in a trilogy of semi-educational albums they made for Disney. As we'll see throughout this list, each album in the trilogy got progressively less creative in how the band approached the respective subject. The first two were clearly for very young kids, but they took advantage of several fun ideas you can teach them about alphabet and about numbers. Not just what they are, but how to use them creatively, to think about them in different contexts. Here Comes Science seems to be aimed at older kids able to understand more complex ideas like biology and chemistry. And science is not anti-creativity, so you could go anywhere with this. But the band just don't know how to talk about any of their subjects beyond lecturing you on what it is with some of their most irritating music. The band makes little attempt to actually talk about subjects in science beyond just saying the elements are, a shooting star is, a rainbow is, photosynthesis/cells, etc. It's the most generic approach to edutainment music they could have made for such a vast well of topics. Previously released tracks Bloodmobile and Why Does the Sun Shine get dragged back out for this album, though they do a new rock version of the latter. Flansburgh does just the worst falsetto in Sunshine. And the new sequel song, Why Does the Sun Really Shine, is supposed to update you on the more accurate things we've learned about the sun in the years since, but it just ends up a microcosm of everything wrong with the album. So boring, yet Flansburgh's voice has never sounded worse. He sings most of this album, and he stretches his voice to its highest and nasaliest limits. It gets tiring to listen to by the end of it, kinda like my voice by the end of my videos. And the effect is like being trapped in class being lectured musically by Spongebob. The only person who turned up to this and was like, our next kid's album's about science? Let's go, was bassist Danny Weinkauf. His song, I'm a Paleontologist, does the same thing of just explaining what a paleontologist is, but he actually brought a song with it, with hooks and energy. It's by far the most popular new song from this album for good reason. It's the best one. We'll see later on that the band have actually made really good kids albums, but this one being the last in a trilogy makes a lot of sense in hindsight. They sound like they ran out of gas for the whole enterprise and just went back to doing their own thing from there. If there's a silver lining to my dislike of this album, it's something my friend Jacob said when I told him about it. That in itself is a testament to TMBG's quality. I am genuinely surprised I did not enjoy this album of children's music. Number 23, The Escape Team. The band's first mini-album, and a collaboration with artist David Cowles. It's a collection of songs about characters devised largely from the band and Cowles, coming up with punny names and writing songs from there, and these characters became part of Cowles' comic of the same name. It's an interesting idea on the surface, but just as an album, the band did not turn up for this collaboration. The problem with the album is just how it sounds. Almost every track has something clunky or obnoxious that drags it down. Linnell's vocals and lyrics on Jackie the Clipper, one of the album's better songs, don't scan well with the rhythm. They sound like they could have used another pass in writing. Linnell's doing a funny voice for Chip the Chip that just comes across as desperate and annoying. His accordion has never been so distracting and disrupting as it is on Flansburgh's minimalist, shanty-ish Bernice. Dr. Sci-Fly has a high-pitched buzzing synth meant to simulate flies that is just annoying. They have another album with a lot of buzzing synths and guitars that I like a lot, and we'll talk about it later, but I don't think it works here at all. The saxophone in Duncan, of course, is off-putting. John Postal almost works on the strength of its clever rhyming scheme, but the pitch-shifted whispering vocals somehow withdraw charm when they come in. Mr. Mischief Night is one of the songs that sounds just fine and doesn't necessarily have something obnoxious or distracting, but it doesn't have much of anything, period. Linnell sounds so bored and uninspired by the character. What doesn't help is that the mix on the album sounds off to me. Like the wrong instruments are always the loudest, and everything's too dry and doesn't glue together. The fourth, third, and second last tracks sync entirely on their sterile mixes, especially Flo Wheeler, which is a particularly laugh-free, funny song. The only track where the band brought their A-game is The Poisonousness, featuring recurring collaborator and Flansburgh's wife, Robin Goldwasser, on vocals. She and the band sound totally invigorated and excited, and they bring an infectious energy the rest of the album needed. The Escape Team sounds like it took a week to write and record the whole thing, which of all bands should not mean anything, but this time it does. The only songs that keep it from falling into bad album territory for me are the first and last tracks. Everything in between, my brain forgets as soon as I'm done listening, and it's the only album by the band where that happens. Number 22, Long Tall Weekend. This was originally exclusive to eMusic, but is now available elsewhere online. It's notable for being the first ever full-length album originally released exclusively as an internet download by a major artist. But in Rainbows, this is not. One big word that comes to mind when discussing the best of this band's music is cohesive. It's a nebulous concept that I may not always be able to clarify, but typically there's a shared tonality in the production or the songwriting that makes the various songs and left turns they take make sense in the context of that album. It makes the songs all sound like they belong together on that record. Long Tall Weekend, however, collects recordings made as far back as 8 years, and the result sounds slapdash. Many of these tracks are dial-a-song rarities or album outtakes. It's Miscellaneous Tea again, just treated like a studio album this time. In fact, it reuses Token Back to Brooklyn, which was a hidden track on just their previous album. It's not all good material. We have an early version of She Thinks She's Edith Head that sounds like an experiment in mixing all tracks completely separated in a stereo, and it doesn't work. Flansburgh's vocals are more forceful, but there's no punch to the instrumentation. Operators Are Standing By sounds like one of the free, quickly written tracks they later release on their podcast. Counterfeit Faker is a bluegrassy track where the vocal harmonies are dissonant, and it feels like the instruments are just out of tune. On Earth My Nina is Linnell singing what he heard when he played Thunderbird backwards, a song that wouldn't be released for another 5 years. It's amusing, but Thunderbird would have been more worth paying money for. The weakness of the album is also partially in hindsight. Because it wouldn't leave eMusic for several years, many of these tracks were also reused or re-recorded, like for Ming Car and No, and especially They Got Lost. The Titular Song, Rat Patrol, Reprehensible, Certain People I Could Name, even Token Back to Brooklyn Again, would be re-released on They Got Lost, a rarities compilation that honestly flows better as a record. Those are all good songs, most of the best of this album, and they sound more like they belong on that than they do here. Long Tall Weekend feels more like an Odds and Ends compilation than the actual Odds and Ends compilation. That said, there are a few highlights that are exclusive to this album. Drinkin' is a nice guitar and horn-led instrumental. It makes for a nice intro to the album. Maybe I Know, a cover they've played since the 80s. It's nice to have an actual studio version of it. Dark and Metric and Lullaby to Nightmares are as good as anything on their 90s albums, and this is the much better, original, dynamic version of Older. The later re-recording on Ming Car is honking and obnoxious. But aside from those 5 tracks, you could honestly buy They Got Lost and skip this album without losing a lot. It's anomalous in their discography. Not disposable, but not a satisfying listen either. Thankfully, those are the only 3 albums by the band that I don't like. Everything hereafter I do, at minimum. But I'm still gonna be picky. Number 21. Here Come the 1-2-3s. This is their 3rd kids album, their 2nd semi-educational album made with Disney, and their 1st ever album to win a Grammy. It's only this low on the list because out of all their kids albums, it sounds the most like music mandated by Disney to be, quote, for kids, even though kids like all kinds of music. Their last 2 kids albums, including their first for Disney, didn't talk down to its audience or half-ass on the songwriting and musicianship, and this one does sometimes. I mean, High Five is Disney Kids Disco, and Oola Oola is Disney Kids Rap. Nobody needs that. Danny Weinkauf's contribution this time, number 2, and Flansburgh's cover of 7 Days a Week rely on this oompa marching rhythm, which will always sound stock to me as kids' music. As fair as that might not be, they've done other songs in that style that work fine. Zeros, I Can Add, Nonagon, and Even Numbers start leaning in the direction of just explaining what something is instead of being creative with it, which was what ruined Here Comes Science for me, but they're luckily in a major minority. Between the 3 Disney Kids albums, it's clear words and letters are the band's forte, but when tasked with writing songs about other subjects like math and science, they run out of creative ways to use and apply them and start falling back on just explaining and describing them. It's still a plenty fun and entertaining album though. There's a lot of upbeat energy that doesn't sound too forced, and Linnell still has as strong a sense of melody and clever lyrics as ever, like with Triops Has 3 Eyes, Apartment 4, Figure 8, and especially 813-Mile Car Trip, which legit rocks. His take on kids' music is clearly to just keep doing what he's doing and not to dumb himself down, and the results are by far the most confident. Pirate Girls 9 and 9 Bowls of Soup are also genuinely hilarious. Guest child singer Hannah Levine does a great job with 12 Monkeys, as does Dan Miller with his song Infinity. He's actually quite a good singer. And 10 Mississippi would seem lazy if Robin Goldwasser didn't just go full opera at the end, which wraps it around to kind of amazing. So again, not a bad album, and probably great for especially young kids, but the band has better kids albums, as we'll continue to see. When we reach the next one on this list, we'll be in the territory of what I consider to be the band's better albums. Number 20. Nanobots. I consider the band's output since the start of the 2010s to be something of a silver age for them. It feels like the period between them becoming a full band in the early 90s and Here Comes Science in 2009 was a free-for-all in the quality and sound of the music and what the band got up to and how they sold their music. Starting in 2011 with Join Us, you don't know how high that one is on this list, the band's output has been fairly consistent in sonic palette, or at least the production, and they started their fan club and got their music and products out to their fans every year. It's like with Join Us, the band figured out how they wanted They Might Be Giants to sound in a way that wasn't so clearly identifiable since the band was just the Johns. And it feels like they keyed into what kind of band they wanted to be in the internet age that didn't require other companies like eMusic or iTunes. True independence in a way they hadn't had since signing to Elektra, if not since signing to a label, period. So with all of that said, why is the immediate follow-up to Join Us, Nanobots, so low on this list? Because despite all of that, this album is a hot mess. There are several great songs on this album, some of the best of the last couple decades. Linnell's in strong form. You're on Fire starts the album with a great use of 2 guitars bouncing back and forth in a stereo mix, and lyrically it's just plainly funny. The title track, Lost My Mind, Call You Mom, Stone Cold Coup d'etat, 9 Secret Steps, and Icky are all Linnell in his best rock and power pop modes. His melodies are ace throughout, and his lyrical subjects deeply uncomfortable. Stuff Is Way does come across as I'm the abstract lyrics guy, this is what I'm supposed supposed to sound like, but I think the song still works because the clanking music behind it makes it sound like the narrator is recovering from a concussion. It makes it feel like a character piece. Flansburgh has some damn good tracks too. Circular Karate Chop is a fun, punkier track, of the kind he's been especially good at since the 90s. Darlings of Lumberland uses keyboards, woodwinds, horns, and vocal effects in a way that terrifies me, and I'm into it. Too Tall Girl is a cute love song with some great vocal melodies. Sometimes A Lonely Way might be one of Flansburgh's best songs, period. It's at least one of his most effectively sad songs, and a great example of how emotive his voice got later in the band's life. There will be debate about what era of the band is best, and my thoughts will be obvious, but I think one of the things that got definitively better as they got older is Flansburgh's ability to convey emotion in his singing. His early songs, even the ones with an emotional core, came across as winking, almost vaudevillian. Compare this song to Snowball in Hell or Sapphire Bullets of Pure Love. Not the saddest songs in their catalog, but not very passionate vocal performances either. Flansburgh mentioned in a 1998 interview that Linnell has a very distinctive voice, whereas he feels like his is more of an anonymous male tenor. To me, that makes Sometimes a Lonely Way feel like a culmination of his developed talents over the years. So that's 12 tracks that are good to great, so what's the problem? Well, that's only half the album, and it gets kinda hairy from there. Flansburgh's other tracks don't impress me as much. Black Ops is kind of a harrowing lyric about American drone strike operations, but musically it sounds like they just didn't bother finishing the song. It really needs more meat on its bones. Tesla, about Nikola Tesla, is in the same vein as Meet James Ensor and James K. Polk, but boring. Linnell's not immune to the boring either. The buzzing meandering of Replicant is just the sound of a gray rectangle to me. Nanobots also has a similar idea to the Fingertips tracks from ApolloEighteen, a bunch of humorous micro-songs to shake things up. ApolloEighteen is much higher on this list, in part because it does this a lot better. The micro-songs there are very short, snappy, they arrive quickly and say their silly, innocuous phrase in their peculiar style, and then you're off to the next one. Most of the micro-songs on Nanobots take just too long, and there's just too long a gap of silence or sustained note between them. It makes their potential silly, cheerful charm kinda dribble away. They draw too much attention to themselves. I count Insect Hospital among these because it sounds like a 10-second idea, but it lasts a minute and a half. Plus, there's only 5 to 8 of them, depending on what you might think counts as one of the micro-songs, so I just question why they bothered. And because they're folded into the tracklist more instead of kept to their own section, they break up the flow of the album. That was the idea of Fingertips, to make playing on shuffle more interesting, but again, they're not snappy enough to support that same idea. I even think there's an exception that proves why these tracks confuse me so much. Sleep. Only 40 seconds long, yet just long enough to fully flesh out its idea. It's another melodically lovely and topically disturbing song from John Linnell, with a fun and even pretty use of vocal overdubbing, and it's one of my favorite tracks on the album. It's like the rest of these short tracks ended up in a dead zone where they weren't short enough to be amusing, but not long enough to be worthwhile. It's a messy album, but it's saved by the best of its material being among their best in all of the 2010s. Number 19, My Murdered Remains. Okay, this fucking ad doesn't want to stay on. We're gonna have to deal with this for a while. My Murdered Remains collects the remaining material from the 2018 Dial-A-Song, following I Like Fun and The Escape Team, which we've already talked about. There's an earlier similar album from the 2015 Dial-A-Song, Phone Power, that's gonna rank much higher on this list, because although it seems it was also the leftovers from that year, the result is actually a very cohesive album with some shockingly good tracks. My Murder Remains is more what I thought Phone Power would be. There's plenty of good tracks, but the album doesn't come together into a consistent or cohesive whole. The first half is the strongest. John Linnell works his power pop muscles on The Communists Have the Music and I've Been Seeing Things, both of which rank with the best on Phone Power. Gudetama's Busy Days is Flansburgh experimenting with minimal instrumentation, but he still manages to make the song sound oppressive to tie in with its theme of isolation. Dog is quietly the album's best track. Linnell experiments with microtones using piano samples while singing about dogs who seem like metaphors for old, terrible people who've long succumbed to Alzheimer's disease or some form of catatonia, and whoever they used to be is long gone. It's one of his most subtly dark songs in a karmic Greek tragedy kind of way. Ampersand is a sweet, youthful love song by Flans that uses spoken punctuation as an extension of the mind of its narrator, who seems to be a young writer. Selectionist is one of the band's best instrumentals, a tremolo guitar over a pounding, fuzzy electronic rock backing. There are some highlights on the second half. I Haven't Been Right Yet is another microtonal song, but in the service of someone threatening to blow up a building. It's unsettling, even when it gets upbeat in the chorus. There's an alternate mix of Last Wave, which is actually the original version that was written while watching the video for Aerosmith and Run DMC's Walk This Way on mute. It's basically a bad lip reading, and it makes no sense without the video, but it is pretty funny. It's very surreal. Best Regrets feels very weird to me as an album closer, because it could have been a great album opener for a darker, introspective album, or even for I Like Fun. It has a nice build in a gloomy, almost post-punk atmosphere. The rest of the songs I struggle to talk about or describe what I like about them, if anything. None of the songs are bad, but they just feel like the stuff that didn't make it to a full album, so they just became the album. If there's anything I dislike, apparently the neck rolls aren't working is a fan favorite, but the lyrics are repetitive in a way that doesn't work for me. And similarly, Tick 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 is just an irritating retread of older. The album also has a bonus disc, More Murdered Remains, that collects every remaining track from both 2015 and 2018 Dial songs. It's only available as a download directly from the band. I decided not to review it, but I will say their cover of Starry Eyes by The Records is one of their very best covers. It was immediately one of my favorite songs the band ever did when it was released, and I think it's even better than the original. No Cops with Cornmo and Door to Door Minotaur are also great. The remixes of Tesla are not. Overall, it's worth buying just for the breadth of good music from the band. It's just, between the two albums that closed out the Dial Song revivals, this feels the most like gathering the leftovers and not much else. Number 18, Book. At the time of recording, this is the band's most recent album. It's one of the band's biggest growers for me. It doesn't have an immediate knockout track, but it has creative and ear-catching moments throughout it, and this unifying tone of things just being wrong in your life. The album was made during the COVID lockdown, which I imagine informed that tone, but it also affected the writing and recording process. I really like the vocal harmonies in Brontosaurus and Drown the Clown, and how weird and chaotic If Day for Winnipeg and I Lost Thursday get. They do a lot of fun things with keyboards, horns, and woodwinds, and there are individual funny or striking lyrics here and there, but there's not much in the way of knockout hooks or lyrical conceits. It's more like little things elevating what's otherwise relatively plain songwriting from what's usually an incredibly creative band. It's not a bad album at all, but it's one that does feel like it didn't have a lot of time or work put into it, despite the many months the band did put into it, in studio and through file sharing. Many of Linnell's songs share a pokey, choppy vocal rhythm that starts sticking out when you notice it. The melodies aren't sung smoothly. Two of his songs, Synopsis for Latecomers and I Can't Remember the Dream, do have a stompy rhythm reminiscent of garage rock that I really like. The latter is probably my favorite track on the album, a darkly optimistic song about living in sadness, but finding hope after just one happy dream. But mostly I think Flansburgh was more in his element this album. His tracks feel more fleshed out, and even harken back to some of the sounds and experimentation he and Linnell did back in the 80s. Now, there was a lot of work that went into the deluxe edition, which is an actual book. Part lyrics, part photography. The lyrics were typed out on an actual typewriter by Paul Sayer. He's worked with the band a lot since Join Us, from directing videos to making cover art, like for I Like Fun and My Murder Remains, and the lyrics to those albums are also in the book. His text work is art in and of itself. It's layered creatively, and it's disorienting where it needs to be. My favorite page is the one for I Lost Thursday, where the word Thursday has been blanked out to visualize it being lost. I like that. I also like Brian Carlson's photography a lot. I do photography very occasionally, and it's stuff like this. Moments of normalcy that look just off enough to catch your eye, or scenes that have been assembled in such an odd way as to make you stop and chortle. But in the end, Book has a similar problem to the Escape Team in that it's a multimedia collaboration, but the actual music part feels half-baked. A good album, but one that needs a few listens to gel. Number 17, The Elves. I have a weird relationship with The Elves. I saw the band live on the tour. I bought the autographed vinyl at the show. No fucking clue where it is, but I bought it. And as great as the band were live, this is an album that I just never go back to. But re-listening to it for this video, I can't really figure out why, because the band's not doing anything wrong. If anything, it's a little more consistent than their previous album, The Spine, but that one's strength is that it taps into the gloom and anxiety of the time it was released, the middle of the W. Bush administration. The Else was released near the end of it, but according to Flansburgh, all of his files at the time were literally saved in a folder called During the War. A few of the songs seem to be about the administration, Take Out the Trash, and the shadow government especially, but mostly the album feels like it exists so that the band could work with star producers, the Dust Brothers, who handle half of the album while the band and their longtime producer Pat Dillett handle the rest. This is not another case of the band not turning up to a collaboration, but it's not their strongest material overall. Flansburgh feels like he's most at home on this album. His side project Monopuff's second album, It's Fun to Steal, felt like it wanted to be produced by the Dust Brothers, and Take Out the Trash is that. A fun funk rock track with a thick bass line. Careful What You Pack was originally written for the Coraline film, and it's a sweet, almost sad, impressively dynamic song about a curious girl. With the Dark also starts sweet and melancholy before going into a goofy blowout with pirates, and it works way better than it should. Flans also has a couple punkier tracks, The Shadow Government and Feign Amnesia. The former skewers the administration of the time by saying secret, unseen overlords would be an improvement, and boy did that song age well. But I keep going back and forth on whether I like Feign Amnesia or not. Currently I lean towards liking it, but the problem is it's one of Flansburgh's clunkiest hooks, and could probably have used a tighter rhythm. It's Linnell who I feel brings the weakest material on the album. Climbing the Walls, The Captain, and the Mesopotamians sound like energetic music trying to back up barely fleshed out ideas. Contra Coup doesn't even manage that. It was written on request to make a song with outdated terminology, and it sounds like he didn't know what to do with it. It's also one of his least flattering vocal performances. His inherently nasally voice goes extra reedy. He does, however, have the pounding tribute to the Dust Brothers, I'm Impressed, and 3 tracks produced by them, the charming power pop Upside Down Frown and Withered Hope, and Be of the Bird of the Moth, an abstraction on hummingbird moths that finds Linnell right at home lyrically. So Flans doesn't completely overtake him. Probably the album's biggest problem is the headache-inducing, overcompressed mix. It's a very mid-2000s album, bit of a victim of the loudness war. Looking at the songs the Dust Brothers produced, I do think they got the band in the same way that Pat Dillett does, but I can't say they brought as much to this as they did for the Beastie Boys or for Beck. It wants to be a rock album with a cool Dust Brothers twist, but it doesn't play into either their or the band's strengths in the process, and while it comes together into a decent album, it ends up just kind of an okay shrug in their catalog. Number 16, John Henry. The band's 5th album, and their first with a full backing band. Up until then, it was just the Johns with programmed drum machines and bass. They got their share of crap for this change back in the day, but that's pretty far in the past. These days, it's hard to think of They Might Be Giants without Dan, Danny, and Marty, or even Dan Hickey, but those guys were not yet in the band. This early lineup featured Brian Doherty on drums and Tony Mamone on bass. Tony would later be replaced by Graham Mabey, who also plays on a couple tracks. Like many of their post-duo albums in the 90s, John Henry is much better than its reputation. Their 4th album, ApolloEighteen, we'll get to it, saw them purposefully writing songs with a more fleshed-out rock instrumentation, and at the suggestion of a friend at Elektra, they brought in a full band for the tour. So when recording for John Henry started, and Brian, Tony, and Graham joined in, the Johns were ready for prime time. The best of these tracks are among the best of the band's whole career. Sleeping in the Flowers, aka Driver, I Should Be Allowed to Think, No One Knows My Plan, Destination Moon, Out of Jail. These songs all rock. Meet James Ensor and The End of the Tour are big fan favorites for a reason. The former's one of their many charming educational songs, made just for the sake of talking about something that interests them, and the latter is one of Linnell's most sincere, sad, and longing songs. It closes the album on a really strong note. They also get reliably weird. The a cappella group Hudson Shad do a great job with Oh Do Not Forsake Me, and Linnell does a great job with a tongue-in-cheek take on punk with Stomp Box. Why this album is as low as it is in the rankings is because it's a hefty 20 tracks, almost a full hour, but it's not 20 tracks of bangers. This version of Spy doesn't punch as much as the EP version. Unrelated Thing is basically I've Got a Match from Lincoln, but meandering. Flansburgh's Dirt Bike is a play on groupthink that Linnell would do better on the next album, Twice. And frankly, the first 2 tracks, Subliminal and Snail Shell, which I do like for the record, are so compositionally plain in comparison to their earlier rock tracks, and so so sonically of the time in a way the band almost never is. Which brings me to another point. This album came out in September 1994. 3 Septembers earlier, Nevermind came out. John Henry sure sounds like an album recorded at the height of grunge. The guitars and drums are sometimes compressed and dirty in a very 90s alternative way, especially in the first 2 tracks. Not inherently a bad thing, and I don't dislike it, but it does speak to why people were so upset that they changed to a full band. Those first 4 albums are wholly unique and timeless. They could have been recorded at any time in the last 4 decades. John Henry could only have been recorded in 1994. For better or worse, it was a point of no return for the band, and what was truly unique and unimitatable about their sound, their approach to music and songwriting, was gone. I think what ultimately saves the album from sounding too dated is they lean on horns for a lot of tracks. I think that was smart. Horns have been a recurring part of their sound since the beginning, especially live, and they add a lot of sonic character back to the band that the 90s production takes away. Though I admit it does give it a lot of shared DNA with third wave ska. The conga-styled No One Knows My Plan is my favorite track from this album, and one of my favorites of the band's whole catalog, and it's because of that interplay between the horns, the guitar, and Linnell's vocals. I don't blame you if the horns get tiring by the end, though. They're all over this album. Thermostat is the one track I'd ever move them from. Ultimately, the album manages to not sound transitional, or even like the band is flailing trying to fit into a mold that they don't. They maintain their personality, they handle the extra muscle on their sound just fine, and the album does often sound like the entire rest of their career. You just can't expect a band this prolific to bat 1,000 every time. And there's a lot less on this album I usually want to stick around for compared to their first 4 albums. Number 15. Venue Songs. This is considered a compilation, but I'm making the one exception for it on this list, because aside from 5 bonus tracks, none of these were released under anything other than the Venue Songs project. So as far as I'm concerned, this is an album. And a live album, it's a double exception. The idea behind Venue Songs was that during the 2004 Spine on the Highway tour, the band would write a song for, about, or loosely inspired by the venues they played at. For legal reasons, the tracks are all titled after the cities they're in rather than the venues themselves. The band are no strangers to throwing out songs in a short amount of time, and while some of them were clearly written under a crunch, they're all entertaining in different ways, and it's an impressively eclectic collection of songs. No 2 sound the same. Many of them were recorded during the sound check before the show, while others were recorded during the show itself with crowd noise and everything. If I were allowed to choose, I think I would have had all of them recorded live, because the crowds are often very enthusiastic and receptive, and that feeds back into the appeal of the songs themselves. Some of my favorites: Dallas, written in the style of progressive rock giants Yes, which quotes the first line of their song We Have Heaven. Being a big fan of both these bands, I think it's pretty awesome. Vancouver is also a really good style parody of My Best Friend's Girl by The Cars. Omaha is a fun synth disco track. Los Angeles, Houston, and Leeds are killer rock tracks. Santa Cruz and Asbury Park are the best and funniest of the album's fuck-around tracks. And London is a great country track about live shows with a funny backstory. Now, the original Venue Songs were released together as an MP3 download, but later it was expanded into the current version that includes a DVD. It stars John Hodgman playing a character called the Deranged Millionaire, who tasked the band with doing this project or he'd steal their talent, Space Jam style. The film is then the music videos for 11 of the Venue Songs, which were re-recorded in studio, and these 11 new versions make up the first chunk of the overall album. This is unfortunately for me the weakness of the album. None of these new versions are as good as the originals recorded on the road. They sound a little clearer, the band clearly took more time to consider the performances, but there's something about the energy, the spontaneity, the slightly rougher recording quality, and especially the crowd response in the live cuts that adds a lot to those originals and is lost here. I think they over-polished them in the studio. Between those and the originals are 5 bonus tracks from various sources. Love is Eternity, a song written for a friend's wedding. Renew My Subscription, originally a bonus track and outtake for The Spine. Taste the Fame, a song recorded for the Adult Swim cartoon Home Movies. Tippecanoe and Tyler 2, an adaptation of a famous presidential campaign song from the 1840 election. And Bloodmobile, a song written for the Philadelphia Science Museum that would later be re-released on Here Comes Science. These bonus tracks are the highlight of the first half. They're all better than the re-recordings. Renew My Subscription in particular is a greatly underrated Linnell track that is hugely relatable if you're depressed. After that is the original Venue Songs in a reshuffled order, And I won't say every one of them is a winner. Charleston, written for the Music Farm, was very clearly their first idea when they read that name. Atlanta sounds like it was recorded without any idea whatsoever. And the country parody Charlottesville is a little too winking and smarmy with Linnell's joke accent. But the band are clearly having fun, their senses of humor are on full blast, and like I said, they sound really good for live cuts. So the grand majority of this album is worth diving into. But that first chunk I would say is best served by watching the music videos. Number 14, Here Come the ABCs. The band's second kids album and their first in collaboration with Disney. This is a much better album than its sequels, in part because words and letters have been the Johns' weapon of choice since the beginning, and they make sure to play with the topic in creative ways without compromising the music. They came ready with songs about the order of the alphabet, alliteration, using letters as both visible images and as sounds and homophones. They brought a lot of clever ways to not just teach kids the English alphabet, but about using that alphabet creatively. But really, the reason the album is better than its sequels is just that the music itself is better. The instrumentation and the melodies are as strong as anything on their adult albums. The piano on Alphabet of Nations and Flying V, and Linnell's vocals on the latter and Can You Find It are downright beautiful. Marty Beller gets the spotlight twice, which is fun. We all like Marty. And his vocals actually fit pretty well with the Johns. The only parts I don't think work so well, unless you're a kid not paying attention, are Linnell's weird breathless voice in D&W, the stock oompa of both versions of Fake Believe, and there are a few songs that only amount to letters are letters, kids, but they were meant to be accompanied with the videos. I have to review this as an audio album, so they come across more like filler on CD. The Vowel Family is also way creepier sounding than they probably meant. If I was 5 to 8 years old, I would have been scared of that song. I was scared of Kraftwerk's Dentaku off of The Mix. It would have happened. But regardless, the album succeeds at being a fun listen no matter what age you are. I was a teenager when it came out, and I was still into it. I don't know if it was that the subject energized them creatively and numbers and science wouldn't as much, or it just had more time in the oven. Either way, for me it's the best of their Disney Kids albums. Although I think the two they made outside of this trilogy are still better. I think the band are much more creative in general when left to their own devices. Number 13, The Spine. I have a musical friend, Christopher, from the Zero Science Network, who once said that when you first get into a band who are still recording, there's always that album they release next that ends up being a personal favorite. I didn't think that applied to The Spine, which was the album that came out when I really got into the band, because look where it is on this list, smack in the middle. But then look at the reception it had at the time. This album got reamed, and here I am about to defend it as one of their most underappreciated albums, so I guess in a way Chris was right. Recorded in the middle of the W. Bush administration and early in the Iraq War, half of the album is noticeably gloomy. The band has always written about dark subjects, usually as black comedy, but this album's not funny. It's mostly straight-ahead 2000s indie/alternative rock, but for some of the songs, I think the band's melodic and lyrical skills are in top form. Memo to Human Resources, which was also on the Indestructible Object EP, is I think one of Flansburgh's best-written songs. It's ostensibly one of his I Hate Work songs, but it captures a person hanging on in the face of depression so well. The World Before Later On and I Can't Hide From My Mind are similar. They're both played like slow, quiet jokes, but they tap into this feeling of entrapment. Go figure, a trans woman in the age of COVID would relate to that. Linnell's songs tend to be a bit more musically upbeat, but their darkness is also more subtle. Wearing a Raincoat and Thunderbird deal with cycles of addiction. Museum of Idiots and Broken 2 are the reliable standby of Love Gone Sour. The former, I think, is one of his most beautifully tragic. And Bastard Wants to Hurt Me is hilarious when you're a teenager. It's different when you develop social anxiety and then come out of multiple closets. The weakness of the album is its inconsistency. Half of the album has an overhanging darkness, but the other half is happy and silly in a way that leans frivolous, and it's not evenly split in the middle of the track list. These songs are still good, but mostly they pale to the songs with more of an emotional center. Seeing the Homestar Runner video for Experimental Film was probably to a whole generation of internet kids what seeing Particle Man and Istanbul on Tiny Toons was for the previous decade. It's a fun slice of Linnell power pop, but in hindsight it feels like take one for Can't Keep Johnny Down. I think the latter is the stronger song melodically. Stalk of Weed is especially silly, like Dr. Seuss vaudeville, but in a good way. Flans also has a couple rockers in the latter end. It's kicking in and damn good times. The latter was co-written with Marty Beller and Dan Miller, which is cool, and it's a fun song about a dancing friend, but It's Kickin' In is one of the best rock songs the band ever did, period. Probably because it's the best This Year's Model song Elvis Costello never did. EC next ranking video, look forward to it. it. Honestly, the only track I outright don't like is Au Contraire, also from Indestructible Object. It's so bland and undercooked considering its lyrical concept, celebrities playing cards and disagreeing with each other. It's the only really weak spot on an album, which I think has a lot more to offer than people gave it credit for. If you were someone who dismissed it or you just haven't listened to it in a while, give it another chance. It might surprise you. Number 12. Why? Their second album from the 2015 Dial-A-Song revival, and as of filming, their most recent children's album, a more direct follow-up to their first, No. Compared to the edutainment of their Disney albums, Why is all whimsy, mischief, animals, and the simple hilarity of putting words together. Education is low on the priorities here, though Flansburgh does make sure to celebrate books in So Crazy for Books, and urge the young to care about the environment in Then the Kids Took Over. Obviously, I think No is the best of their kids' albums, and we'll talk about it when we get there, but No and Why succeed as kids' albums because they don't pander to what adults think children's music should be about or sound like. Mostly. Yes, some of the songs are a bit musically cutesy, like Oh You Did, and Mom and Kid, and Elephants, but they don't talk down to kids. The band just makes songs they would normally make, but lay off heavy subjects and get silly, which they often do on their adult albums anyway. And the result is fun, charming music that's sometimes wickedly funny.
Don't say these words to your dad, that he's gross or that he smells bad.
Oh, definition of good. Clam secretly smiling at clam jokes.
Get your 8-year-old out of a tree.
Dog, 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 dog.
Why is a celebration, and it always leaves me in a good mood. Number 11. Glean. This was the first of the 3 albums from the 2015 Dial-A-Song, and it most feels like a successor to 2011's Join Us, we'll get to it, in that it's one of their albums with a palpable, playful enthusiasm. It sounds like it was fun to record. The opener, Erased, is a reliably dark, Love Gone Sour power pop track from Linnell, but the second track, Good to Be Alive from Flans, feels like more of a tone setter for the album, a comfortable cheeriness. 2015 was the last year before things got truly dire, so you could still write a song like that. Flansburgh feels the most unrestrained on this album. Music Jail uses a prominent violin by Rob Moose, in a way that brings to mind their classic cover of Istanbul. Madam, I Challenge You to a Duel has a relaxed, piano-led stroll that highlights the ridiculousness of the lyrics. I'm a Coward is a sweet, semi-psychedelic love song with some blistering guitar, but its best part is Flans using his voice especially well in the chorus. Let Me Tell You About My Operation is an upbeat swing number where the narrator dug his ex out of his brain, but his best track for me is All the Lazy Boyfriends, a joyously sarcastic synth-pop track that pairs well with Good to Be Alive as tonal mission statements for the album. Linnell mostly writes within a rock sphere, but it's some of his most consistently strong songwriting in years. Aside from Flansburgh's songs, Linnell has 4 particular tracks that define Glean for me. Erase, like I mentioned. Answer, one of his great, quiet tragedies about a person who never gets what they wish for. Ah, a list of things that might make someone scream. It's one of the funniest songs he's ever written. But the highlight of the whole album for me is Unpronounceable. You could argue it's a blatant rehash of Anna Ang. Gated start-stop guitar, a pining love song for someone the narrator doesn't know, and themes of communication. That's how I interpret it anyway. But I would argue it's a stellar rehash of Anna Ang. It's an excellent melding of Linnell's lyrics and vocals with the disorienting music, and it's one of their best, tightest hooks in years. The album also closes on the title track, an instrumental composed mostly of very short samples from a mellotron and a Chamberlin that Linnell plays saxophone and keyboards over. It's one of their most sonically interesting tracks. It sounds like an early 1900s jazz band dislodged in time. The band don't get enough credit for how good and creative their instrumentals are. It's a really solid album overall. Like I mentioned back in Nanobots, the 2010s found the band solidifying their sound and approach to music with a clarity they hadn't had since the early 90s. Glean is them getting comfortable in that framework. It's an album I like a lot, but it just missed out on the top 10. The ones that beat it there might surprise you. That's smarmy as fuck. Number 10. Factory Showroom. Tails, you look like you missed the candle. This was their second album as a full band following John Henry, and it's their first with longtime producer Pat Dillett, although he had engineered for them as far back as Flood. It's another one of the band's most underappreciated albums. It's a fan favorite, but Elektra Records didn't promote it enough, it was overlooked by everybody at the time, and it didn't get many good reviews. Totally undeserved. They took all of the strengths of John Henry and condensed them into a tighter package. Has anyone noticed he's sitting on a dumbbell? Linnell is killing it with his songs. Till My Head Falls Off is one of the best, most real rock songs about anxiety and mental illness. Spiraling Shape and Bells Are Ringing are two great songs about drugs and or mind control, but more broadly about herd mentality and trying to fill the emptiness in life. It's off-putting to hear him celebrate Manifest Destiny in James K. Polk, but it was the 90s, nobody was thinking. It's a fan-favorite educational song regardless. I feel like Flans was playing more to the mainstream in comparison. His songs are lyrically or structurally straightforward, but he's smart about it. SEXXY and XTC vs. Adamant, there's so many X's there, are conceits that aren't especially funny. I think the latter is only a fan favorite because XTC and Adamant are kind of obscure, especially in the US, but just the addition of string sections lift the compositions of those songs a lot. How Can I Sing Like a Girl and Pet Name are just two of his best rock and pop songs, and he sings a great cover of New York City by indie twee pop band Cub. I Can Hear You is also a fun song to listen to in hindsight. It was recorded on a wax cylinder and references technological advancements and bits of modern life at the time, like supersizing at McDonald's or the brand new ability to have a phone call on a plane. But recording to a wax cylinder keeps the references from sounding dated because the song's already dated by the format. It weirdly future-proofs it. I don't know if this is still the case, but Flansburgh did call this his favorite album of theirs 2 years after it came out. And while it's obviously not mine, I do think Elektra failing to promote the album was one of their biggest mistakes in their fraught relationship with the band. It's a much stronger record than its critical reputation, enough to just edge out Glean for my top 10. Speaking of undeservedly ignored, number 9, Phone Power. Their third album, collecting tracks from the 2015 Dial-A-Song, I actually missed it when it came out because I thought it was just a compilation of leftovers. The album cover looks almost exactly like one of their previous compilations, but the band consider it a proper studio album, and it turns out it's kind of the best of the three. The energy is mostly at a medium, except for the penultimate 3 tracks where they amp it up, but that allows the melodies and lyrics to shine. The music is full of this interesting, moody tone. I can best describe it as modest, psychedelic gloom. It's like this is where they put all of their darker songs from Dial-A-Song 2015. Maybe they saw an encroaching darkness that most others laughed off. You can hear this in Linnell's tracks, which are all layered in dark comedy, paranoia, and unhinged narrators, while Flansburgh's tracks seem to struggle more with the present and even refer to then current events. The darker mood is similar to that constant sense of wrongness that Book has, but fleshed out better musically. Some of their best melodies and hooks of the whole of the 2010s, and a fun overarching use of fuzzy guitars and keyboards, like on I Love You for Psychological Reasons, To a Forest, Trouble Awful Devil Evil, Snowy, Impossibly New, Shapeshifter, all big highlights for me of this era of the band. The more abstract, dissonant constructions of Sold My Mind to the Kremlin, Got Getting Up So Down, and What Did I Do to You are also a lot of fun, and I Am Alone's chorus is just a great punchline to the setup of its verses. That consistency makes sense knowing that the bonus disc for My Murder Remains has more rarities than outtakes from the 2015 Dial-A-Song, so Phone Power is very much the best of that remaining material. Also, it has a wild rock cover of Bills, Bills, Bills by Destiny's Child, and a non-boring version of Black Ops. Good shit. Number 8, I Like Fun. This is one of the band's darkest albums, and considering death and black humor is their bread and butter, that's saying a lot. Ignore the makeup, that's not what sounds high on the list. Much like The Spine, this came out in the middle of another seemingly endless living nightmare, but it's a more consistent record this time. The ever-encroaching specter of mortality looms over this album. From the sarcastic cheeriness of the opener, Let's Get This Over With, to the literalized separation from one's physical form in I Left My Body, the apocalypse described in By the Time You Get This that did not lead to a better future, the thoughts of a murdered wife in Mrs. Bluebeard, the desire to beat the effects of aging and push back the hands of time. When the Lights Come On sounds like the narrator is just hoping to survive a disaster. Most blatantly, the final track, Last Wave, has the chorus, We die alone, we die afraid, we live in terror, naked and alone, and the grave is the loneliest place. The funny thing is, like I mentioned back in My Murdered Remains, the song was originally written as a kind of bad lip reading of the video for Run DMC and Aerosmith's Walk This Way, which the band would play between sets live. This version is a new recording of that. It's part of why the other lyrics are nonsense like, you gotta buy me antlers, antlers are what I need you to buy. But by putting the song at the end of this album, the effect is much more nakedly bleak than funny. It turns into the sound of someone cracking under the weight of their mortality. Even outside of death, there's a melancholy throughout the album. All Time What has the narrator completely lose all sense of their world after a breakup. An insult to the fact checkers is a scorching rocker about being betrayed by a friend. It's not about Trump, go figure. I Like Fun is an eerie, off-kilter song about being stuck on prescription drugs. This Microphone is a softer, smoother song about dealing with keeping fears and emotions bottled up. The Bright Side outright says the bright side is blinding our eyes, an overt corruption of optimism. Lake Monsters feels a lot like it's about Trump supporters and how omnipresent and overbearing the whole regime felt at the time. McCafferty's Bib is pure sonic anxiety with its high-pitched buzzing and microtonal chords in a song about drugs, depression, and submitting to madness. And The Greatest is a somber waft through the mind of someone who seems to be experiencing imposter syndrome. At least that's how I read it. Musically, the album is pretty in line with their previous records, especially Glean. It's the dark tone of the album that gives it its character, and if any of the songwriting was weak, it wouldn't be this high on the list. But none of it is, and it manages to be something of a high point late in their career. Number 7. No. The band's first Kids album is also their best, because unlike the ones that followed, it knows the secret. Kids already like their music, so all you have to do is record a batch of They Might Be Giant songs, take out all the death and despair, and make them about cute, fun things like robots, random household objects, a treehouse with a mouse, being stood up on a date and not realizing it because a nearby clock is broken and you stay there unwittingly until you die of old age. And the importance of the word no. In particular, the closing track Sleepwalkers feels like a rewrite of Spiraling Shape or The Bells Are Ringing from Factory Showroom, but gentle and sweet instead of nightmare fuel. No is such a warm, charming album. We've already seen this earlier on the list, and this won't be the last, but some of the band's best albums audibly sound like they were fun to record, and this one sounds playful in a way the band hadn't been since their early records. There's occasional voice modulation and pitch shifting just to make it sound weird. Some of the tracks like Violin, Clap Your Hands, Wake Up Call, and I Am a Grocery Bag are just amusing words and noises. They probably make more sense if you have the enhanced CD and can see the animations that were made for them. This also started the tradition of having other band members and friends/relatives take part. Danny Weinkauf's first Kids song, Where Do They Make Balloons, shows that he already had a knack for enjoyable kids music. And Robin Goldwasser sings a cover of children's educational song In the Middle, In the Middle, In the Middle, and comically outclasses everyone in sheer vocal talent. I know I'm not ranking EPs on this list, but Robin sings harmony on multiple tracks on The Spine Surfs Alone, and it's already a really good EP, but her voice elevates it a lot further. In general, the melodies on No are as strong as anything on the following albums on this list. 4 of 2, The House at the Top of the Tree, and the closing 3 songs about sleep rank up there with the very best of the band's whole catalog. And I'm not even going to pretend that Wake Up Call isn't one of my favorite They Might Be Giant songs, and it's just a goof track Flansburgh made on his laptop. Like its sequel, Why, it's one of those albums that just leaves me in a good mood. That's not why it ranks higher than I Like Fun, but I Like Fun doesn't leave me in mortal despair. I'm like that normally. Number 6. Ming Car. Ming Car is a great album that did not get its due and had one of the all-time worst release dates. The band wanted this to be a successful record. They worked with several different producers, including Pat Dillett, the now late Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne, and Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley, who had previously worked on Flood. The production throughout the album is so nicely polished, and the performance is so tight, that the band does one of their best jobs conveying emotion. There's palpable joy in Linnell's power pop parody Bangs, and Flansburgh's cover of Georgie Fame's Yeah Yeah, another one of his great covers. Cyclops Rock is an excellently ferocious punk track. There's a somber, tender sweetness in Linnell's folky Hovering Sombrero, and Flansburgh's Another First Kiss, a sort of sequel to Pet Name from Factory Showroom. Linnell's Hopeless Bleak Despair and My Man are quintessential lyrical dissonance, being extremely dark and depressing songs played ironically cheerfully. And his I've Got a Fang and Wicked Little Critta are, I don't know, just shamelessly silly, but they're really fun. Musically, the band lean a lot more on electronics and digital production and composition, and not just for the awesome club music parody, Man It's So Loud in Here. I have no proof for this, but I feel like that's a major roadblock for people liking this album, especially professional critics who were not inclined to liking or appreciating electronic music. I do, so it was no problem for me, but it's worth noting. This album sounds like it was a blast to record. It would be higher on this list, but this is the worst honking version of Older, and Mr. Excitement is one of the lamest songs the band ever did. It's this embarrassing rap rock thing where I can't tell if it's a joke. If the album had to have a song with Mike Doughty and the Elegant Two, they should have just put Your Mom's Alright on every version of the album, rant over by Ming Car. Number 5. ApolloEighteen. ApolloEighteen rocks. It's probably my personal favorite of all their albums, as long as I skip the parts I don't like. It has some of my very favorite They Might Be Giants songs. Dig My Grave, I Palindrome I, The Statue Got Me High, See the Constellation, all great guitar-driven rock songs that anyone would have been proud to write and record. I even count the closer, Spacesuit, up there. I think it's their best instrumental, and they have a lot of good instrumentals. A real strength of the album is its production. It's one of the few produced entirely by the Johns themselves, though there's a whole story about how Elvis Costello nearly produced it, which, look at where his career was at the time. Maybe it's a good thing it didn't happen. We'll get to the band's previous 3 albums soon, but they all have a shared sense of artificiality, due in part to the drum machines and samples used, and their previous 2 in particular have a very late 80s, early 90s coldness to their sound. That's not the case here. The mix and production is so fresh, crisp, and punchy that ApolloEighteen could have been released at any time in these last 30 years. The follow-up, John Henry, had the opposite case, sounding exactly like the year it was released, and I think that stark difference in sound is part of why it was such a shock to fans at the time. It wasn't until that next album that the Johns brought in a full backing band, but they did consciously go for more rock instrumentation. And in hindsight, it should feel like a transitional album because of that, but it doesn't. The guitars and drum machine punch harder, but they maintain their eclecticism and playfulness. She's Actual Size and Turn Around have swinging beats. Mammal is one of their early, semi-educational songs just about different types of mammals. The guitar interpolates a fun, funky guitar and bass with a parody of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Dinner Bell lists food items at increasingly fast speeds. Flansburgh takes a more sensitive approach to internal and external struggles with My Evil Twin and Narrow Your Eyes. It's also fun to hear them update an older Dial-A-Song demo, which describes how you're feeling, which was written back in the 80s, and hearing it faster yet more minimalist in its music. They also go full silly with the Fingertips Suite, a collection of novelty microsongs in many different styles meant to make listening on shuffle more interesting. They could easily be annoying when played in sequence, but they're not because of their brevity. They come in with a short, innocuous phrase in an amusing style, and then they jump to the next. Despite it being a big favorite of mine, the reason it's not number 1 is that it's the earliest of their albums where I just have to step back and admit there are tracks on here that I will happily skip every time. Hall of Heads feels like a flood left over that Flansburgh just didn't finish writing. I think it's the most boring of his early spy movie type tracks. If I Wasn't Shy is also kind of dull and underwritten. Hypnotist of Ladies leans uncomfortable in hindsight with its subject, though it does have a killer tremolo guitar riff. And now that I'm in my 30s, I just find Spider annoying. It was funny when I was 12, yet I still like Fingertips. Like I said with Nanobots, they're short and punchy and they get out of the way. WarioWare Fingertips. Seriously, look forward to that Elvis Costello ranking video. His Warner Brothers years are going to be interesting to talk about. Number 4, Join Us. Yes, a later They Might Be Giants album outranks one of their first 4. It's that good. I've loved Join Us since it came out. There's an uncommon joy in its music, and a clarity and brightness to the production that even the utterly hateful songs Can't Keep Johnny Down and When Will You Die convey such a happy tone and melody. Let Your Hair Hang Down and Never Knew Love are rare, seemingly optimistic love songs from them, 2 of their sweetest. The album is like No and Ming Car in that it sounds like it was a lot of fun to record. There's also this feeling of camaraderie among the band that I don't always hear in their music. The Johns usually sing a song on their own, sometimes they'll back up each other, but actual duets and interplay between them didn't happen too much at the time. There's quite a bit of them together on this album, the aforementioned Let Your Hair Hang Down and Never Knew Love. You probably get that a lot, The Lady and the Tiger, Spoiler Alert, and You Don't Like Me. Hearing the Johns together so often makes them feel like a united band in a special way that adds a lot to the album. Credit to Flansburgh, like I've said, I've always leaned more towards Linnell's songs and his voice in general. Flans kinda owns this album for me. Old Pine Box, Cloisonne, Celebration, In Fact, Protagonist, Judy Is Your Vietnam, 3 Might Be Duende. His songs really lean into his strengths as an eclectic singer and lyricist. Maybe not Dog Walker, and they play more with styles and sounds, whereas Linnell's tend to be a bit more musically straightforward rock and pop. He kinda outshines Linnell, who has 2 of the weaker tracks for me. Kenna Johari is a leftover from The Else, and You Don't Like Me sounds like it is. They're 2 of the more musically languid tracks. That said, he also has Can't Keep Johnny Down, Let Your Hair Hang Down, and When Will You Die, songs that so nail the melodies and whatever tone or story they're going for that they sound like they've always existed. They were instant TMBG classics 6 for me. You Probably Get That a Lot is also a cute love song, but directed towards a cephalophore, aka a saint carrying around her own severed head. In 2082 is about a time traveler mercy killing their future immortal self, so Linnell's still keeping up. Like I've mentioned, Join Us feels like the band entering a silver age. Not since ApolloEighteen were they so clear and confident in their own musical identity, nor did they feel beholden to elements around them. The political landscape, the popular music landscape, their record labels, or their collaborators. The band sound like they figured it out. And even if none of their albums since stand quite as tall in my mind, Join Us is still a big favorite of mine even a decade later. This brings us to the top 3, and yes, it's their first 3 albums. But what order are they in? Number 3, Lincoln. The Johns dodged the sophomore slump with their second of 4 classics in a row. Their first album was very lyrically abstract and a bit lo-fi sounding. Lincoln is more polished in comparison, the mix is clearer and brighter, and the songs tend to have more of a narrative. Linnell, of course, hits it out of the park. First track, Anna Ang, one of the definitive They Might Be Giants songs. That gated guitar riff is as They Might Be Giants as his accordion, but it's also a genuinely affecting song about wanting love. Same with They'll Need a Crane, but about a relationship falling apart. There's real emotion layered in there. I've Got a Match is also about a failing relationship, but it isn't sad so much as so full of barefaced contempt that it borders on not being funny, and that just makes it funnier. Apparently the Johns got burnt out on the song and stopped playing it live, so maybe they at least don't think so. Purple Toupee, I think, is right up there with Anna Ang as one of the band's classic tracks. A high-energy skewering of boomer nostalgia. Where Your Eyes Don't Go, Mr. Me, Stand on Your Head, Kiss Me Son of God. Linnell really was firing on all cylinders as a lyricist from the beginning. Such clever and creative wordplay that flows so nicely with the widely varied music. He apparently also wrote The World's Address, though Flansburgh sings it here. It's a really cool salsa-styled song that almost feels like he's laughing at his own propensity for puns and wordplay. Between it and No One Knows My Plan from John Henry, I think Linnell might be a fan of Latin jazz. Flansburgh has always been more of a performer and showman than Linnell, and that carries into his songs, which have less of an emotional core to them, but dip more into different genres or have a satirical edge, and they tend to be the slower songs on the album. Lie Still, Little Bottle is a very Elvis Costello-ish jazz lament about drugs. Cajun Aquarium is a play on Age of Aquarius from the musical Hair that really amps up the silly, bouncy instrumentation, and he does bring the most energy and speed on the album to Santa's Beard, a Christmas rock song about the most Christmassy of topics, jealousy and infidelity. I used to not like You'll Miss Me because it's so messy, aggressive, and in your face, but I've come around to liking it entirely because of that. The demo for it is much more restrained, but I think the song is supposed to be about someone who's kinda gross and repellent, so it needs to sound kinda gross and repellent. Like I mentioned, I think Flans wasn't as good at projecting emotion in their early years as he would be in the future. I think that's part of why I always lean more towards Linnell's songs. He's not without heart though. Flansburgh has always hated dull, soul-crushing work, and Snowball in Hell is one of his prettiest examinations of feeling trapped in a dead-end job. Part of that is Linnell's beautiful accordion playing though, and true to that, I think Flans's best tracks have some interplay with Linnell. The World's Address, like I mentioned, Cowtown and Shoehorn with Teeth have them duet, and I always enjoy when they do. They have a campfire sing-along quality. There's just a lot of great stuff on Lincoln, and I think it's even a little more consistent than their debut. The only reason I rank it lower is mostly because of that polish in the mix. Its clarity and dryness makes the artificiality of the drums, bass, and sampled instruments more obvious without doing as much creatively. The first album got away with it better. I do think Lincoln has more interesting songwriting though. You can tell they matured between albums and they had no fears about doing whatever they wanted. The highs on Lincoln are among the highest of their career. Number 2. Flood still stands as a pillar of the band's discography, for better or worse. Their major label debut with Elektra, it saw the band get a bigger budget, and they used that money to just keep doing what they were doing. Birdhouse in Your Soul, Istanbul, Particle Man, a lot of kids grew up with these songs, myself included. I'm not gonna lie, I could have easily put this at number 1 just for Birdhouse. I don't care if it's their best song or not, it's my song. 4 of the tracks were produced by Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley. They're probably best known for producing most of Madness's work, Tu Raye by Dexy's Midnight Runners, and a pair of contentious pop albums for Elvis Costello. Apparently those 4 songs they did blew most of the album's budget, but the money went to a good place. I think Clive and Alan got They Might Be Giants in the way that Bill Krause and later Pat Dillett did, and they put that money into making those songs sound as good as possible. And hopefully by well paying all the friends they brought in to play play additional instruments. Birdhouse in Your Soul and Istanbul are joyous and lush. We Wanna Rock is another creative dip into country/bluegrass. All three of them have Mark Feldman playing a gorgeous violin. Your Racist Friend might have one of the more dated sounding productions on the album. It's one time where the cold artificiality of the sampler and drum machine is most noticeable. I wish the subject was dated, but here we are. Trumpeter Charlie Sepulveda does lift the song a lot in its bridge, and horns would of course become a much bigger part of the band's sound through the 90s. And credit to the band for not letting the racist off easy in the final verse.
Can't shake the devil's hand and say you're only kidding.
Outside of those four, the band are as eclectic as ever in this era. Linnell's songs see him writing more character pieces, some of them darkly humorous. The immortal alt-pop stomp jam, Birdhouse in Your Soul, heartwarmingly narrated by a nightlight to its owner. The piano-based Dead, where the narrator gets reincarnated as a bag of groceries after a life as a terrible person. The very early 90s sounding Someone Keeps Moving My Chair, where a guy named Mr. Horrible gets comically evilly harassed. The minimalist bass drum and accordion-led Whistling in the Dark, where two people try to warp the mind of the ineffectual narrator. And Women and Men, a possibly outdated take on human population growth, but it holds up by virtue of sounding and feeling like an old sea shanty. And of course, Particle Man, the classic sing-along about the asshole triangle man. Flansburgh once again leans more into genre experimentation and satire. Lucky Ball and Chain is a play on classic country divorce songs, which smartly alternates between playing it straight, the narrator calling the ex-wife a ball and chain and playing up his coolness and indifference, and subverting it, following each verse by saying confidentially, and actually laying his cards on the table about what they had and what he knows he's lost. It's a smart song. Twisting just flat rocks, the band kicking into their new wave roots with Linnell rocking the organ. Hearing Aid has Flans dip into more Caribbean reggae territory, singing druggily from the point of view of yet another person who seems to hate his job and possibly life at this point. Minimum Wage is fittingly one of the band's shortest and most minimalist songs on a studio album. The title sung loudly, a whip crack, then keyboards and a Frank Sinatra sample carry the song away for 40 seconds. It's Minimum Wage. It doesn't last very long. Hot Cha is a jazzy quasi-tribute to the Parker Brothers game Derby Day, and it, more than any other song on the album, feels like Flansburgh is trying to sing and assemble a song like someone else, but I wouldn't have a clue who. Sapphire Bullets of Pure Love and Road Movie to Berlin are simple ideas, respectively a play on the dissonant idea of bullets of love and a dated reference to the Berlin Wall, but both songs have a nice atmosphere to them, until the latter kind of explodes into sampled horns. And of course, the band's theme, as it were, They Might Be Giants, which is just Looney Tunes-esque nonsense to me. But where would we be without it? Should also mention Flans and Linnell singing together again on two songs. First, their violin and accordion-drenched cover of the Four Lads' Istanbul, Not Constantinople, which has gone on to not only be the definitive version of the song, but one of the definitive They Might Be Giants songs. Second, Letterbox, an impressive tongue twister and one of their many great early campfire-esque duets, and I think one of their ambiguous love songs. Hard to tell, but it's another highlight for me. What keeps Flood from #1 for me is the same problem Lincoln has, that cold, dated production. What was cutting edge in 1989 would not be for very long, and those sampled MIDI instruments stick out a lot. This was apparently the band's first album recorded digitally, and it has that sonic coldness that's trying to replicate real instruments without just being its own thing. I also think the final fourth of the album is kinda weak. Apparently the recording was rushed near the end, and the songs end up sounding just kinda slapped together. I really hear that in They Might Be Giants and Road Movie to Berlin. The latter is noted for missing an entire verse, and the former feels like it's missing pieces even though it was purposefully overloaded with tracks. But there's a reason this is still the They Might Be Giants album to the wider world decades later. Nobody made music with such abandon like this, and nobody really has since, and the Johns did it so well. But there is one more album that is even more utterly They Might Be Giants, and it is called #1, They Might Be Giants. The band's 1986 debut, where they arrived fully formed, knowing exactly what they are. Whatever the fuck they felt like being in the moment. Cheapo programmed drum machine and bass, sharp new wave guitars and keyboards in tandem with accordion of all things, and a surreal, abstract approach to lyricism where they may be saying nothing at all, but damned if you're not gonna stay up at night wondering, Deputy Dog Dog a Ding Dang Dippy Dippy? Much of the album was updated mixes from their 1985 demo tapes, and that's the attitude of this album. Loose, lo-fi, and giving no fucks. The album has one of the band's best 1, 2, 3, 4 punches right at the start. Everything Right is Wrong Again, and Put Your Hand Inside the Puppet Rabbit Head, practically mission statements for each of the Johns. Number 3, immediately showing their eclecticism and the Johns' chemistry when they sing together. And Don't Let's Start, one of their biggest singles and still one of my all-time favorite songs, period. She's an Angel is one of Linnell's most sincerely sweet songs, even as the things the couple do are just silly. Nothing's Gonna Change My Clothes is one of his great darkly funny songs, has a swinging rhythm I find infectious. Rhythm Section 1 ad is practically an autobiography for early They Might Be Giants, expressing frustration at people who didn't get them back when it was only 2 guys, and it has so much fun energy and a machine gun vocal from Linnell. He and Flansburgh turn around The Who's famous line, "Hope I die before I get old," with "I hope that I get old before I die," one of their best duets. It's practically made to be sung with friends. Flansburgh, of course, seems to take more of a satirical approach to his songs. Youth Culture Killed My Dog rips into the idea of musical scenes and cliques. She Was a Hotel Detective is an old-school rock and roll sex jam, but about someone in an unsexy job. I do prefer the single mix, but the scrappy album version works here. Alienations for the Rich is a spoof of country music, class divides, and existential dread. I still prefer Linnell's tracks, because I'm a hopeless fangirl for his songwriting, but Flansburgh was right there with him even from the start. There's several short, weird, Residence-inspired tracks like Toddler Highway, Boat of Car, Chest Piece Face, The Day. Stuff that may be fan favorites, but aren't guaranteed to make it to a best-of compilation, except Boat of Car, I guess. I don't consider them filler, though. The willful weirdness and off-putting keyboards are an important part of this album's charm. It's an album by 2 friends who just do whatever they want, and they are 2 very talented but very strange people. And I know, putting their first album above everything else they've done in almost 36 years, well above anything with the Dans or Marty, fucking sucks. It fucking sucks to hear someone say you peaked at the very beginning, or that your band's best music was from before you joined. I know. I feel like an asshole saying it. At least you guys have joined us in Ming Car. But those first records with only the Johns hold up even today because of how utterly unlike anything else they are. And that's why I say their self-titled debut is their number 1, because even they never sounded like this again. It's a truly singular record. Utterly, irreplicably, They Might Be Giants. And that was my list. Some honorable non-album mentions. My favorite EP, The Spine Surfs Alone, is like the band's Halloween record. It's just full of creepy, weird songs, but it works so nicely as its own package. Go figure the goth likes it. Favorite compilation? Then The Earlier Years, which combines their first 2 albums with 2 more bonus discs of basically everything else they did in that era, minus their 1985 demo. Essential listening if you're new to this band. Also special mention again to They Got Lost, which is a compilation of rarities that works as an overall record just as well as their studio albums. If I were to add it to the list, I'd put it just below Venue Songs. And I haven't listened to many of their live albums. I'm not actually big on live albums in general, so I couldn't give a real favorite. I'll just say the show I saw in Sacramento, which was recorded, but something went wrong so they couldn't upload it to their site, so it will only live on in my forever dying memories. I do remember it started with people waiting outside of the club, mistaking Danny Weinkauf for Marty Beller just because he walked out with drumsticks. Poor guy. But that's the video. Thank you all for watching. If you'd like to see more from me, please support my Patreon, links in the description. I'm planning on ranking the albums of Elvis Costello next, then eventually Sparks, Beck, and Pink Floyd. People are going to be way more mad about those. Reminder that this video was inspired by Elliot Roberts. He's done videos where he ranked all the solo albums of Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Be sure to watch those and all of his other videos. He's very good, especially if you like 60s and 70s music. Or just handsome Australians.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you again to all my Patreon patrons, and look forward to more from my strange little niche. More Sonic on the way. Flood!